On the Canadian west coast, there's a group of islands called the Gulf Islands. One of these, Salt Spring, is well known as a refuge for people seeking sustainability away from the negative aspects of a modern world. Dan Jason lives on that island and is an organic gardener. He is also author of several books and the leader of the Seed and Plant Sanctuary for Canada. One of the most important activities on Salt Spring Island is the Ganges Saturday Market. Here, vendors must make it, bake it, or grow it themselves. This is the essence of the market and reflects many of the island people's philosophy of life. At the market, you will discover distinctive decorative arts, clothing, and jewelry. There is also plenty of organic food to go around and free festive fun. If all this were not enough, it's a good place to meet local poets. After this inspiring stop at the local market, I went further inland looking for Dan Jason. Dan received me in one of the gardens of the Seed and Plant Sanctuary for Canada, otherwise known as the Seed Sanctuary.
Hi, you guys. Welcome to the Salt Spring Center Garden.
Hello, Dan.
You picked a beautiful day to come. You ready for a walkabout?
Oh, yes.
See all the flowers and the herbs and the yummy foods?
We definitely want to see your garden.
Okay, come on down.
We're following you.
Come on. The Seed Sanctuary is a network of people across Canada who are trying to maintain our endangered heritage varieties of all kinds of seeds. And it's based on Salt Spring Island, where we're growing out all the major food crops and all the medicinal plants that we can possibly grow in Canada. We're keeping records of them here. We're maintaining all these varieties, and we're trying to get backup collections everywhere across the country, in every province and every kind of climate zone. It's quite different than the thing that's going on right now in Norway, for example, and in other places where they're trying to create gene banks where seeds are just stored away in the event of some future disaster. But our whole approach is that kind of disaster that we're putting seeds away for is really happening right now. The world is changing so fast that if we don't adapt and if we don't keep on growing out seeds that are constantly adapting to the changing environmental conditions, then we won't have any seeds at all. When you freeze seeds for however many years and keep them in the event that they'll be needed down the line, it forgets the whole notion that plants are adapting all along. Right now, there's some things I've noticed just in the few years that I've been saving seeds where conditions are so changed that you have to grow things in different ways. There's a shed over there with all the garlic hanging because I know that if I put the garlic out in the sun to cure, the sun will actually fry the garlic. And it used to be that there was no problem that way at all, but with the change in the ozone, you can't do that anymore. And it's like that for a lot of other things. The point being that we have to keep on growing things out. It has to be a living gene bank. Otherwise, we could be in trouble. We won't have any seeds for the future. The main base of the Seed Sanctuary is here on Salt Spring Island. Because I live here and because people know me, I've put it out to the whole community, the importance of saving these heritage seeds. And we've kind of taken it on really as an island. Of all the people in the Seed Sanctuary so far, half of those are probably on Salt Spring. Everybody's doing all this for free. All we have to do is maintain the databases on our website, and that's really the only expense. Everybody communicates with each other through email or phone or letters, and it's basically a communication system, and everybody who loves seeds doing their job of preserving those seeds and just staying in contact with each other. So it is quite incredible in that this whole project has nothing whatsoever to do with money. Well, we're in the main greenhouse for starting the plants, and from beginning of February through March, April, May, this is just full of the baby plants before they go out into the field. And now it's kind of the leftovers. It's mainly what we got in here are peppers and basils and some tomatoes. And soon all of these will be out because this becomes the place where all the seeds are dried for the seed sanctuary. And they come in and they're all on trays, and they take another day or two drying, and then I take them out and thresh them and process them. So this is a two-purpose greenhouse for starting things and for the whole drying process. The equipment that you need to get the seed is pretty basic. I have a little air compressor that I blow the chaff away, but even with that I could just use screens, and all it takes is screens and buckets, really, and that's all the materials you need.
Do you think that there is a myth about the efficiency of modern technology in agriculture?
Well, let's face it, we've been saving seeds on this planet for 10,000 years, and everybody's been doing a pretty good job of it, and we've had an unbelievable selection of all kinds of food and medicinal crops, and that's been done without our so-called great scientific advancement in terms of developing seeds. That whole thing is all about just ways to make money and to control the resource. It has nothing to do with the ease of saving seeds. Actually, the opposite. Science has increasingly brought us non-food that has no nutrition whatsoever, and it's destroying all the great food that we've had forever and ever on this planet.
Some observers say that you are very pessimistic. What do you think?
Actually, I think I'm extremely optimistic. I can see a future where we get back to small-scale agriculture, people working together on the land in harmony with everything else that's going on the planet, and growing food for communities, growing it in a much more sensible way. It's a beautiful occupation, and many, many more people should be involved with the very basic thing of growing food for us so that we can all enjoy this planet. And we're going to be forced to do this, so we might as well just start waking up to the fact that that's the way to go, instead of trying to exploit the entire planet with no thought of what's coming back whatsoever.
Do you really think that people in the cities should move to the countryside?
Well, I think that people in the cities should move back to the countryside, some of them, because for most people it's a horrible life in the city, and I attest that it can be a beautiful life in the country, and that many, many more people should have the right and privilege to enjoy that. And I do think there is a movement afoot to, kind of like in the 60s, but in a much more serious way, where we realize we have to re-inhabit the earth. We can't just live in the cities without any consciousness of where our food comes from. Mind you, we can grow a lot of food in the cities. There's a lot of rooftop spaces, there's a lot of open spaces around churches and big establishments where gardens can be grown. People are starting to do that on a pretty good scale already, and I think that's just going to continue. This basil with this interesting heart-shaped leaf is called Kilimanjaro basil.
It is from Africa?
Yeah, it is from Africa. This basil is a Greek basil, which is very, very pungent, but has quite small leaves compared to the Kilimanjaro. This basil here, I always put the labels, is Genovese basil. And this one probably is the most famous basil that is used for making pesto. Just, it's great in combination with the olive oil and the Parmesan cheese and the pine nuts. This is more characteristic, I'd say, of the basils to have these long pointed leaves like that. But I don't know. There's probably so many basils that I've yet to discover, which I'm sure are just waiting for me.
I wanted to see what some of the other people from the agricultural milieu thought about Dan's comments. For example, is it really true that organic food tastes better than non-organic?
I mean, anyone knows the difference between a fresh organic strawberry picked in June versus a square cardboard California strawberry. The one is deliciously wonderful, the other is like cardboard.
Well, taste is obviously a very personal point of view, and for me, whenever I taste an organic product, it's almost always better, more flavorful, and better tasting than any comparable commercial product. I think most people have found the same thing, and the growth of farmers markets and the growth of local food systems have been testimonial to the fact that people like the taste of organics. And clearly, when things are grown more locally and when things are grown with more care for the soil, they do have more flavor because they have more nutrients, because they've traveled less distance, because they've been processed less. And that all adds up to taste.
I also wanted to understand why Dan Jason thinks diversity is so important.
The point about genetic diversity is that it allows, all that genetic diversity was created by nature for a very good reason. So if a pest or fungus comes through a field with the full diversity, it'll never take out more than 10%. And so even for organic growers, you've got much more protection against the natural pests and fungus that are in the world with diversity. As soon as you have one species only in a crop, if you get a variant pest, it can do a lot of damage. There's another point linked to that, is that before we had mechanized farm machinery, if you're cutting the grains, cutting the crops, it doesn't matter how high the corn is, because you're going to cut it anyway. As soon as you bring an artificial threshing machine in, everything has to be the same height. So they chose the plants that were a certain height only. And at that point onwards, they started eliminating genetic diversity. Because if they're too small, they miss the harvesting machine. If they're too tall, they chew it up. So right back to in the 1700s, we started the problem as soon as we applied mechanical. Now, I'm not saying we should not have mechanical harvesting, because it's a long way to go back. But we need to feed back in the genetic diversity, because nature gave us genetic diversity for a really good reason. And it's relevant to each particular ecosystem where it's evolved for good reason. And we're making ourselves very vulnerable if we just get down to a few limited varieties, especially when the pests are evolving very rapidly to defeat the pesticides.
When the Green Revolution was introduced into Indonesia, at that time, depending on how it's classified, they had between 100,000 and 1 million varieties of rice that was grown throughout the country. The International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, others convinced Indonesia to accept the Green Revolution, to wipe out most of the indigenous rice crop, and instead to plant 3 varieties of rice, 2 of which were sister strains, and to use the chemicals from the transnational corporations to grow more rice. And for a while this actually did work. Their rice production increased, but then the inevitable occurred and disease did hit, and because there were limited varieties of rice, it was devastating. Indonesia was fortunate that they had oil wealth, and they also did have seed banks, and in their wisdom they started to reintroduce old varieties of rice back into their economy, and they started to encourage producers to go back to organic means. They, over the course of the next decade, they went from the 2 or 3 varieties that had been introduced back up to 10 commercial viable varieties out of more than 100,000 that they had before. This is an example of how we can introduce fewer varieties for the benefit of transnational trade, but then destroy our lifeblood and destroy our chance to survive as a planet and as people. So we need these varieties. We need to have the diversity of seed in order, if things go wrong with the present-day system, we can save it. We can go back and we can reintroduce varieties. If we don't have small producers, if we don't have people growing and saving seed, then if disaster occurs, we don't have any alternative. We don't have any place to go to reintroduce varieties and to start building the biodiversity and the strength of the system that has been developed over millennia.
Speaking about food for food itself doesn't get to the aspect of human consumption that is culture and community. And when you look at culture and community and the way that it has happened traditionally, it has been together with the land. It's been in harmony with the earth. Once we have cities, we exist in them, and everybody knows that we're creatures of habit. We have patterns. It's part of our mental processes. And our children growing up in cities are not going to have the patterns of their forefathers on the land. They're not going to understand, even if they go on classroom field trips out to understand where a cow lives, they won't have that in their understanding of everyday life. So it's really important for us to consider that even though we can green our cities and bring the environment and the growth of food into the city with urban agriculture, we need to also consider ways of living in small communities, eco-villages, farming communities, and sustaining the growth of food on the land and that relationship between humans and the land. It's really inherent to an earth that is going to be sustainable for the future.
We need to have, and this will shock some people in the organic community, mass production of organic food. And because of the challenge of that, because you've got to have biological diversity, you can't just have, 1,000 square acres of one crop. We need to have people going back to the land, back to the prairies, building, expanding on the old villages, because we've got to have more people living on the land to do the labor to grow the organic food. But for a lot of people living in the cities, what better life could they have? They'd love to be able to go back to the land, live in ecological villages, live close to the land, do the farming themselves, get a good income from it, and feel they're really nurturing the planet.
That is our overhead sprinkler system.
That system looks so simple. Is that all you need to water your large garden?
Pretty much. We have a large irrigation pond here, so we have as much water as we want. We don't water very much, though, because a lot of the things that I grow, especially the beans and the grains, don't require much water at all. And on top of that, we tend to mulch heavily all the crops that we grow. So that means that the moisture is held into the ground and the ground stays moist. And we try and mulch everything in the end so that we have to water as little as possible. But we do have these overhead sprinklers and we do use them.
There is no need for more than that?
No, not at all. That's all you need for a garden. Of course, some people aren't so lucky to have a sure source of water, but it's nice for us to have a pond that doesn't run dry.
When we visit the countryside of Canada and the United States, we see a lot of complex watering systems for big industrial farming. Do you think that there is an overuse of water?
That has to be one of the jokes of this past 50 years, because they've been using so much water that now there's a scarcity of water almost everywhere for the large agricultural projects. And a lot of the wells that used to be near the surface, they go down first, a mile, then 3 miles, then 5 miles, and they're running out of water in all the major industrial agricultural components of the country. If you're trying to water thousands and thousands and thousands of acres, that's a total different trip from watering a small farm where you have a few acres and you can develop all kinds of systems for maximizing your water production and just by creating shade through planting the right trees in the right places or creating areas where the water can gather. But if you're going to do something on the scale of modern industrial agriculture, you essentially have to mine the water out of the soil, and if you keep on doing that, the water table goes down and down and down and down until you run out of water, which is what's happening everywhere in North America now. The reason we put all this mulch hay around the tree is, well, there are a few reasons. Probably the most important being that when it rains, the rain will go right through the mulch and keep the soil moist, and if there were a barrier of grass, the grass would absorb all that moisture to grow, and this way the actual tree gets all the benefits of the rain. And also all the organic matter that gets added to the soil as we keep on applying mulch around the tree means that the tree will be fed with natural fertilizer.
There are a lot of flowers here.
A lot of sunflowers, and these have been getting picked even.
Is it true that the more you have flowers, the more you have insects?
And the more insects there are, the more they all keep each other in check so that none of them get out of control. If you just have one plant, it tends to end up being one insect, and the cycles keep on going so fast that those plants end up being in danger. But if you have a whole bunch of different insects, everything keeps in balance. All the years that I've been growing food, I've never had any disease or pest problems because I have so many different things growing at the same time.
With more insects, you must attract something else, too.
Yes, with insects comes birds. And birds help with pollination just like the insects do. And the bees, the same thing. So for me, that's a really significant thing because the birds and the bees and the butterflies and the moths all fertilize the seeds, help with the cross-pollination. We have many different flowers all over the garden. I'd like to intersperse them with all the herbs and the edible plants. And some of the flowers, too, are edible. But here's an example where I did this planting mainly for myself because this is kind of a pathway down to the bean section and the berry section of the garden. And these are some heritage flowers from, this one is I think 100 years old. These are called Persian carpet zinnia. And they have quite a variety of different flower heads, but they're all one named variety called Persian carpet, and it's a low-growing plant, and it's a nice border plant to plant in front of other taller flowers, such as these orange cosmos, are also another heritage flower. This variety is called sunset cosmos, and it makes a really nice combination with the zinnia, and then on top of that are sunflowers. And up here, here we got a couple of bees happy to discover this sunflower, and it's a nice little border that these sunflowers make. They're almost like a wall here as you go down this row, and so every day I walk by these sunflowers and they're just starting to bloom now, and I'm going to see more and more blooms every day and more bees every day. They are having a good time in there.
I was not able to resist the call of the flowers, so I took the time to explore the garden and stopped at those I thought were the most beautiful on that sunny August day. Is this the plant that helps those who suffer from cancer?
This plant, milk thistle, is quite famous as a liver and stomach tonic, and it's very, very powerful. A friend of mine was told that he only had a few weeks to live, and he wanted to know, he'd done some research on milk thistle seeds, and he wanted to know if I had any seeds, and when I gave them to him, he started chewing them daily, and he ended up living many, many more months than the doctors were predicting. But even though there are a lot of great medicinal plants for things like cancer and many other things, it's been found lately that organic food itself has really great properties in terms of fighting cancer. And these are not found in conventionally grown agricultural food. This is a milk thistle that has already gone to seed, and normally it's a little bit higher and you have to be careful when you're plucking the seed, but you just come down over the top and then you grab the seeds and pull, and that's how the harvest happens.
So what do you do with that?
You actually can chew the seeds just as they are, without the fluff on though. The fluff comes easily off if you rub it. Otherwise, just rub the fluff, and then I put the seeds away, and that's my stash of milk thistle seeds.
Is this what you call your non-corporate cancer medicine?
You got it. And here lower down is cilantro, which is also called coriander. It's usually called coriander when you're talking about the seeds, and cilantro when you're talking about the leaves. And most people know it's very good in cooked dishes, but it's also quite effective medicinally to encourage appetite. And it's well loved by bees and insects. As you can see, there's some buzzing around now. This here is calendula, and it's a very famous medicinal plant used especially for skin conditions. And it's also used in salads. It's probably the best known flower to be used with your green salad. You just pluck the petals and sprinkle them and add a little bit of orange to your greens. This is the plant that I call 1,000-year-old tobacco plant. And the reason being that 4 years ago somebody sent me this through the mail from Ontario. They said the seed had been dug up in an urn in a sacred native Indian burial site, and because it was absolutely airtight, there was no moisture, the seeds germinated, and they did a carbon dating of them and found them to be 1,000 years old. They look like they're 1,000 years old. Everybody who comes in the garden says, "Whoa, what is that? Where does that come from?" And they're unlike anything I've ever seen in terms of tobacco. And most people are quite amazed that these are tobacco. They often ask, where does this plant come from? And they can feel that it almost evokes another space, another place, another time. And now I've sent these seeds to many, many native Indian locations across North America.
The neighbors and the members of the seed sanctuary were busy working that day. The mulch had to be spread on the ground to conserve water, and a deer had to be chased away from the delicious organic soybeans it desired. As I continued my visit through one of the most rich and diverse gardens in North America, Dan Jason continued his political discussion. He is convinced, based on his observations, that organic gardens and fields are extremely productive and profitable. He believes that non-organic industrial farming is spreading myths that organic growers are amateur producers. He also insists that non-organic North America agriculture seriously pollutes our environment with dangerous pesticides, chemical fertilizers, and genetically modified organisms. According to Dan, those methods are putting our health at great risk, and our governments are closing their eyes, refusing to label products that include genetically modified organisms. Once again, I wanted to see what some other people from the agriculture milieu thought about Dan's comments.
Fundamentally, I think the vast majority of the profits in the industrial food system have to do with government subsidies. They don't have to do with the internal economy of the large-scale global food system. They also have to do with the fact that globally there are only a handful of corporations that each stage of the food system that control the food system. And globally, the international trade is by and large, and in huge measure, between transnational corporations, not between small companies, not between governments, but between transnational corporations. And the vast majority of that is intra-transnational corporations. So it's corporations dealing with their own subsidiaries and buying in one place, moving it to another, processing in another, combining in another, marketing in another. And therefore they can control their financial sheets, and they can demonstrate whatever profitability they want in whatever way they want. And in order to get subsidies, they can show that they're actually not making money, but their shareholders and their corporate executives certainly are benefiting in an enormous manner. So the profitability of large-scale food companies compared to organics is questionable. It's really about subsidies more than anything else.
The only other concern in my mind then was, well, what if the whole world was to eat organic food? Because we hear people from the big companies like Monsanto saying, oh my goodness, if the whole world ate organic, you have to cut down all the rainforest, you'd have to sort of tear up all the wilderness areas in order to have enough food because the yields are so low. Well, when you look into the actual performances of organic food, you find that the yields, fascinatingly, in the developed world, when you change to organic, you get an average yield drop of about 20%. But that 20% is not a drop in nutrients, it's only a drop of water in the plants, because they've been bulked up by the fertilizers. In the developing world, when you change to organic, you get an average 93% increase in yield. And over the world as a whole, you get around 75% more calories per person on the whole planet with organic food than you do with current existing food. Quite amazing. If we'd really want the planet to be as healthy as possible, with food for everyone, the whole planet should go organic.
The reality is most of the world's agriculture is organic. And we see a lot of this industrialized mass production here in North America. Even in Europe, there's a lot less of it than there is here. But for years and years, people have been able to feed themselves and to bring food to market. And with very scientific organic farming, you can get phenomenal yields. So it isn't the case that organic farming is non-scientific and industrial farming is super scientific. It's two different forms of science.
That organic farming is by far the most productive, healthiest way for all of us. And all the other spin-off effects, from farmer suicides in India to the loss of wildlife, to the loss of worms, to the disappearance of, to the runoff problems, they all vanish if we just go back to full organic farming. It's natural.
One of the consequences of large-scale industrial factory farms is that in order to grow product faster, they use more nitrogen, they use more chemicals. Most of those chemicals are not taken up by the plants or by the animals, or they're excreted by the animals. And they wind up in the water table. The water table goes into the rivers and into the lakes and ultimately into the oceans. So you have places like the Gulf of Mexico where the water systems flowing into the Gulf have created a dead zone of enormous magnitude where no life exists. And that's happening all over the planet, where there's massive pouring out of effluent and wastes from an industrial food system.
The pesticides that are still part of the green revolution, the organophosphates, the really strong pesticides, those are not sustainable for the long run. Fertilizers also are something that came about as part of the green revolution. They're very concentrated. It's like thinking of the difference between taking a really harsh medicine for cancer, for instance, compared to changing your lifestyle, changing the way that you think, and looking at all the interactions in your life, including psychologically, to bring about health. And that's where fertilizers are really just a natural way to sustain the soil. And if we're adding industrial fertilizers, it's not a necessity. It's a really concentrated solution.
One of these days, we're going to have a case on behalf of a member of the public whose grandparents were ill as a result of the water, whose baby was ill as a result of the water, and it will be directly linked to pollution as a result of pesticides or herbicides. That's going to be the future case. Now, the problem is the law is going to have to change. And for the law to change, you have to start convincing politicians that a healthy environment, a healthy agricultural system is in their best interest. Right now, the large corporations, the multinationals, are the ones they listen to.
Beneficial insects or beneficial organisms in general, not just insects, are all part of a healthy, functioning agroecosystem. Pesticides are getting rid of more than just the pests that they are out there to tackle. That is what is not sustainable about pesticides. And a sustainable solution is one in which the whole system is looked at on a case-by-case basis to understand the interactions that are there and to promote healthy soil for the growing of food and a long-term plan.
We don't know what new monster pests we're brewing so we're accelerating the evolution of the pests so fast by applying the pesticides. Because you can kill 99% of the pests with your pesticide. 1% lives, it's resistant, it passes on its genes to the next generation, now they're all resistant. Now you've got to use more chemicals. It's a treadmill that goes nowhere except trouble. And we don't need it. We don't need to poison the farmers. We don't need to put pesticides in the wombs of mothers. We don't need to put pesticides in the blood of babies in the womb. You know, we don't need, this is stupid, 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 when organic food is better, healthier, and we can grow more of it.
Once again, I wanted to see what some other people thought about Dan's comments.
I'm terrified of the development of the use of particularly corn, rice, and now less so tobacco, but many of our farm crops, we're starting to talk about biofuels and using them to produce, a substitute for gasoline or oil-based fuels. But we're also talking about going in the direction of making our medicines using the plants and engineering them with that's going to contaminate our food supply with birth control medicines, with anticoagulants, with cancer medicines, blood thinners, and pig diarrhea medicine. The things I'm saying I'm not making them up. These are the real things that they're engineering into the crops. It's a source of real concern. Are we going to have to worry that when you eat a bowl of cornflakes, it just might have a birth control medicine in it? I mean, these are real issues. We already have experienced this kind of contamination. And we've had a couple of incidents where a couple of companies have lost millions of dollars when crops had to be withdrawn.
Well, I think the government knows that if we invested as much energy and money into organic farming as we did with genetically modified farming, we'd probably profit by far in the long run. I'm sure they know that. And we may be heading that, whether it takes, just a change of government or whether it takes apocalypse. At some point, we will come full circle. The problem we have in the interim is that there's a narrowing window in order to do that, because once the infestation occurs, you can't reverse it. So canola, genetically modified canola, has more or less infested the canola marketplace in Canada. Monsanto's pushing hard to have genetically modified wheat introduced in the Canadian marketplace. When they do that, what would stop any other cereal from being subject to the same threat? If we don't stop now, or at least start to control the dispersal of genetically modified organisms, there won't be any turning back. And maybe that's what it's all about. Maybe at the end of the day, Monsanto thinks that they can control the entire food supply, and they've got the government convinced that that's the way to go.
And now there's increasing evidence that, yes, it destroys cells in the guts of mice, pigs, cows, sheep, goats, and they're dying. We've had cows die in Germany, we've had sheep and goats die in India, and we've had people become sick, and even some have died in the Philippines and also in India. The people were raising maize in the Philippines, people were raising sheep and goats and BT cotton in India, in Madhya Pradesh and Andhra Pradesh. And what happened was when people tried to harvest the cotton, when the workers in the cotton ginning factories, or the farmers in the fields, or the people who were transporting the cotton by truck, all of them exposed to the cotton became ill. So this raises some very big questions. This is BT cotton, which goes into sanitary napkins, goes into bandages in hospitals, comes into contact with open wounds. This raises many questions about the safety of BT cotton.
Part of Sierra Legal's role, or part of the role we playing in the courts, is educating the court. And quite often we find we go before the court and talk about concepts that the court's never considered for. For example, I was in the BC Court of Appeal and used the word ecosystem and had to explain to the court what that meant because they weren't sure. And we're seeing the same thing happen in the context of genetically modified organisms. You know, not only do other countries have charter rights that protect the right to a healthy environment, they sometimes set up courts that have a greater grasp of technology. They have environmental courts and they have health courts. And you would go there and the courts would have expertise and they would understand the problems that you're talking about. One of the difficulties we face here is that the notion and the theory of genetic modification is extremely complex, and it's asking a lot for a judge to sit down there and understand its consequences, and as a result it's an obstacle to getting truly informed decision making about our rights our legal rights in the context of a court hearing. Courts are an obstacle to addressing new risks as a result of technology.
We now have a form of pollution, genetic pollution, which is very different from PCBs, DDT, and these chemicals, because it's alive. It's reproducing. You can't just stop producing it. It'll just produce itself. It'll keep on reproducing. Like the canola, the genetically modified Roundup Ready canola, which is now spreading all over the prairies in Saskatchewan. This is our problem. And the fear I have is that it will also, that with some of these forms will also now be spread via bacteria in the soil who are swapping genes and pick up these elements of this transgenic material, which is in the crop residues. It's lying. We harvest our crops and we think we're done, but we're not done because there are residues lying in the soil. And even if you don't have any crop residues, you still have little rootlets that are underneath the soil that come in contact with the bacteria in the soil. And the bacteria in the soil can pick up the transgenic elements from them. There's too much we don't understand. We can't even culture the bacteria to even do the test. We don't even have names for many of the soil bacterium. We don't have names for many of the bacterium in our own mouths and in our guts. The level of our knowledge is, we're not ready for this. The technology has run way ahead of the science.
Very little money, very little time and energy has been put in to finding out what the consequences of genetically modified organisms are. And this has been compounded over time. And each time we get closer to more accountability, there are new products that come up. So right now, nanotechnology is actually bigger in terms of revenue than biotechnology, and virtually nobody has heard of it. Yet it's in products already. There is no regulatory process of any consequence for this anywhere in the world. And it means that there are new life forms that are being put into products that are in our environment and even in our food that we have no way of knowing what the consequences will be.
Let me put this in context. I'm currently co-authoring a major new book called Cancer, 101 Solutions to a Preventable Epidemic. And it's primarily about removing the causes of cancer in the chemicals, pesticides, the environmental causes. While researching the book, I was told about some stunning new research being done in Britain on the connections between cancer and organic food, like why organic food defends us against cancer. And the science starts like this. It starts with a professor of drug development back in Britain called Jerry Potter, who's a full, pharmaceutical specialist, who discovered that every cancer cell has an enzyme in it called CYP1B1 that is doing nothing. And he was puzzled by this. So he developed a drug that would trigger it. And when it's triggered, it attacks the cancer cell and the cancer cell alone. So then he thought, well, So the drug's under development and will reappear in 15 years. Then he thought, well, if the enzyme is there, there must be something in nature that triggers this. So he searched in food for something that would trigger it, and he found it in red grapes, a product called resveratrol, which will trigger the enzyme to produce a substance called picoatanol, which attacks the cancer cell and only the cancer cell, no other part of the body. So it's, in that sense, it's the ultimate grail, the holy grail of cancer research. He then started looking for that same substance in other plants and couldn't find them anywhere. And this was a mystery, like why was this product not in all plants? Then they started looking in organic plants, and they were everywhere. So and then he thought, why is this substance only in organic plants and not in the non-organic? And the logic is very clear, because when plants are attacked by pests and fungus, they've learned to defend themselves. So over millions of years, unless they defended themselves, they wouldn't be able to pass their seeds on. So part of the genetic heritage of the plants is a natural defense. That one of the defenses they develop is a compound like resveratrol, and they've now found almost 50 varieties. They call them salvestrols together. And so when we eat the plants that have defended themselves against pests and fungus, we eat the salvestrols. The salvestrols in turn trigger the enzyme in any tiny cancer cell to produce the picoatanol that attacks the cancer cell. But now imagine that you're spraying plants with fungicides and pesticides, so the plants shrug their shoulders and never are exposed to fungus, so they never develop their defenses. And so all non-organic food is deprived of what may be nature's most important defense against cancer. And that's like, when you think about it that way, it's so natural. There's also research that organic food has 30% more antioxidants in it. Antioxidants will attack the free radicals that, in the body and sort of, go after them. For the same reason, antioxidants are part of the plant's defense systems. Organic food has more vitamin C in it. For the same reason, vitamin C is a type of antioxidant that also, is there to defend the plants. And then it's such a simple idea that you realize that all non-organic food is junk food because it's deprived of the fundamental life-protecting mechanism that nature evolved over millions of years. We wouldn't be here as healthy bodies if we hadn't had successful evolution of our bodies over millions of years, always eating plants. Our bodies are almost the same as our chimpanzees. So we evolved that same kind of body, always eating plant material. Here it is off the tree, chew it straight away. It's never been exposed to a chemical fungicide or pesticide. They're totally new to nature.
I read that in the past you went to Ethiopia and had an eye-opening experience. Is that true?
Well, I learned how little I knew about cereals. A story I'd like to relate is when I told the people who were in the gene bank in Addis Ababa, and I was telling the people that I had Ethiopian barley, and they thought that was so funny. They even laughed for about 10 minutes because they finally could let it out that they actually had over 6,000 different varieties of barley in that very building. And there I was, being so proud that I had one barley that I was calling Ethiopian barley. It was totally absurd to them because they had barley for every imaginable thing. They had barley for different times of the day, for different meals, for thatch, for sprouting, for doing barley grass, for feeding animals, for malting. It just went on. And each barley had, special characteristics that made it suited for that particular thing. So I started from that moment really to realize just how much potential there is in diversity.
Do you think we know a lot about cereal grains in North America?
Well, the interesting thing is that our entire focus is on wheat to make bread flour. And I certainly saw when I was in Ethiopia and just from reading about other cultures that all around the world people grow grains to eat them as whole grains, for example. Or like I said, in relationship to the barley, you can grow grains for sprouting and for eating them as the grass, like barley grass or wheat grass. So there's whole realms of possibility with grains that we don't even think about in Canada. it's really strange we eat so much rice when we could be eating our own wheat as whole wheat. It's much more nutritious that way, rather than processing it into flour.
I followed Dan Jason to the cereal fields to look at what he had to show me.
This is a really special planting of grains. There are over 60 different old heritage varieties of wheats, barleys, oats, emmer, and spelts in just this patch here. They're all in patches of just about 20 feet long. And they've come from all around the world, and a lot of them are special. They're not only wheats for turning into flour to make bread, but there's all kinds of wheats for eating whole and for sprouting and for wheatgrass. And some of these are as old as 10,000 years old. This is called Utrecht blue wheat, and it's one of the prettiest wheats. It makes a gorgeous display when presented with flowers. There's right in front of me here, there are three interesting, totally different kinds of grains. This is called triticale, and it's a cross between wheat and rye. And this is black einkorn. Even though the heads are green now, they're going to turn into a dark black color. And just in front of me are hulless barleys. They have these long golden awns, and if you rub the seed heads, the kernels come right out, and they make a beautiful whole grain. The garden this year for me has been a pretty interesting one because I haven't mixed things up as much as usual. Usually I have everything growing everywhere and there's 1,000 different things. There's still 1,000 different things, but now everything's in groups. Like for example, this whole patch right here are tomatoes, all in one block. And there's over 100 different kinds of tomatoes here. And then I have my grain patch all in one patch, and I have my bean patch all in one patch, and all the lettuces are together. And for most things I have over 100 different varieties of each, but they're all together. And then I have other sections of the garden though where things are mixed up. This tomato variety here is a great example of some of the really interesting things that we are maintaining now in the seed sanctuary. It's called Pollock tomato. Pollock, named after Andy Pollock, who's a friend of mine now. He has become a friend since sending me this years ago, and we've been communicating about it ever since. And he's made a selection of this Bonnie Best tomato from a heritage variety in its own right, but he's been selecting for earliness and flavor for 35 years, I think, now. So this tomato is adapted to conditions of really cold weather and wet weather on top of that. And it's one of my best early tomatoes. Great, great flavor.
What is this unusual colored plant?
It's a very unusual broccoli. This was bred by somebody in Oregon, and it's a cross between a regular kale and a broccoli. And the beauty of it is you can eat the leaves, which are as yummy as kale, and then it forms a big, quite fat head in the middle. That's a broccoli head. And if you cut that, you'll get the broccoli, and then it'll form side shoots like regular broccoli. But this is a very unusual combination of things that you'd normally find in two different plants.
Do you cook it?
Oh yes, you could eat it raw, but it's really your choice. It's quite yummy raw, not at all harsh. But then if you steamed it for 2 minutes, you'd get, you know, what most people consider the way to go with broccoli.
This is an impressive looking plant. What is it?
It indeed is a gorgeous looking plant. It's a leek going to seed. And that's one of the great things about letting things go to seed. Often they end up producing this incredibly aesthetic gorgeousness. And the ordinary person who's just a gardener doesn't grow to that level of saving the seeds, misses that whole opportunity for a completely additional visual. These will be here probably for another month or so, and have already been flowering like this for a month and a half. So it's a really long-lasting visual display. Quite a presence. Okay, come on up. This is Action Central for the seeds, and you can see how little space seeds take up. There are thousands of seeds in each of these small containers, for example, of peppers and lettuces and tomatoes. Even those little vials have thousands of seeds. And the only seeds that take up any amount of space are the beans. Some of them are over there. And in this small room represents most of last year's harvest, all the seeds that I have left after, sending out seeds this year. But look at all the different varieties here. There's probably close to 1,000 different varieties in this small room.
Is it complicated to harvest and store organic seeds?
Gathering seeds is not complicated. It's really, really simple. People have been doing it for thousands of years, and it's just a matter of letting the seeds be the completed part of the cycle of the plant. The plant just goes on until it produces seeds, and then you just have to figure out what the seeds are, which is usually pretty obvious, and then how to gather them, which is usually pretty obvious too if you think about it. Some of them can just be plucked, and some of them can just be shaken into a bucket, and the only thing to worry about is to be sure that they're dry thoroughly, and then to have an appropriate container where they stay dry.
And these seeds are alive?
These seeds are all alive at this moment. There's an incredible amount of life here. Sometimes you'll hear about the astrological perfect time to plant seeds, but it's kind of funny because seeds don't ever stop being alive unless you do a Terminator technology or something like that. Seeds are just waiting for the proper conditions, and then they're even more alive and they get growing. But everything here is totally alive. I know that all these seeds would germinate if I planted them.
Dan, are you afraid of Terminator seeds?
Afraid? I'm not personally afraid because after all, everything I'm doing is a positive way of ensuring that we do have seeds for the future. But I think the Terminator seed concept is an incredible, you can call it a metaphor for our time, that somebody would actually invent seeds that would self-destruct. There's kind of a parallel to that. It's about our whole agriculture, which really is in the process of self-destruction right now. And they've chosen to even go for the seeds and to have the potential of not having any seeds in the future. Farmers will no longer be allowed to save their own seed, and you won't have seeds that are simple and savable like they have been forever.
I heard that it is more and more difficult to send organic seeds to the United States. Is this true?
That's exactly right. A lot of people who have attempted to send seeds to the States have had the seeds returned or confiscated on the grounds that they might contaminate the seeds in the United States, which is kind of a joke when you think about the contamination of genetically modified seeds. These people have so much power, and they're trying to go for 100% control, and they're saying that us little people, or just the average person who's trying to save their own seed, there's a problem that we might contaminate their seeds.
Do you think our governments are doing enough to protect seed diversity?
It's an interesting thing to think about because, to my mind, I always thought that one of the functions of government would be to know what seeds could grow in a country and how to grow them, and to let that information out to people in a free sort of way. And now it's gone totally to the opposite, where seeds are owned and patented and hybridized in ways that you can't find out information, or they're created to self-destruct. And the government has handed over that area of knowledge of plants that can be grown in a country right over to transnational corporations who have nothing in mind really except profit. So that's the kinds of seeds that we're getting now, ones that are only designed to benefit the corporation that creates them.
Once again, I wanted to see what other people from the agriculture milieu thought about Dan's comments.
Terminator seed is, when you plant a seed and it will germinate for one season, and you'll grow a crop from that seed. But the seed that's produced from that, so you plant a grain seed, you get a grass that produces grain, and then the seed that you collect from that, that harvest, you cannot save those seeds and plant it again because they will be sterile. That's what Terminator genes do. They make the crop the following season after it's grown once. It makes it sterile. So the farmer won't be able to replant it. That's the whole reasoning for it. That's the motivation for them developing a Terminator seed. If the Terminator gene cross-pollinates with a species, a similar species of weeds or grasses that's growing on the edge of the field, then that species will also not germinate after the second year. What is that going to do to our gene pool and our diversity? We're now killing more species around us. We're putting an end to them. If you plant a seed and it doesn't grow, well, that's the end. That could be thousands of years worth of diversity that had been built up, and we're killing it in one generation. So yes, we feel like this is very dangerous, and that's why there's so much resistance to it.
All of the organizations directly linked with biotechnology, chemical fertilizers, and pesticide productions declined my invitation to participate in this documentary. Even Agriculture Canada, who originally agreed to locate participants to explain the official position of the Canadian government on non-organic agriculture, refused.
The government and industry have become much more sophisticated in the way in which they're introducing new technologies. They've become much more sophisticated in the way that they're marketing. I think if you ask most corporations and most government people why biotechnology is so questioned and why it's having so much problem in the food system, they'll say that Monsanto was stupid and arrogant in the way it tried to force biotechnology down the throats of people. And if they had to start all over again, they would be much more sophisticated. They would do the same thing, but they would introduce it in a way that the public would not get their backs up and not be so much upset by it. So I think that there's countervailing forces occurring. I think many more people, both in government and in corporations, are recognizing that they have to be much more responsible, and they have to work on ways to protect and to save and to regenerate the planet. There are others that are still totally wed to the old economics and to the international trade and to global domination, that they are going to try and protect the system at any cost. Either way, we have been getting less information, and the information is more restricted because of corporate concentration in every realm, and particularly in the media, and because of the consolidation of information and the sophistication. They're controlling information to a greater and greater degree, so it's not surprising that they would try not to participate with documentary filmmakers that are trying to show what the alternatives are.
One man who worked for 16 years as a high-ranked agronomist for Agriculture Canada offered his opinion on the use of genetically modified organisms and pesticides. I reached him by phone.
First of all, the federal government of Canada, like most other advanced countries, only permit the use of pesticides that are registered in Canada under the Pest Control Products Act and regulations. Having said that, it is also important that Canadian farmers are able to produce products affordable to consumers, not only in Canada but also in many other countries less fortunate in terms of their financial ability to purchase more costly organic produce. As to genetically modified plants, I do believe that the government ensures that the genetic modification is resulting of improvement of the quality and productivity of the plant. An example is the canola crop modification, which has created a healthy oil almost free from two harmful chemicals, glucosinolate and arsenic acid. So the Canadian government is definitely aware of the issue and making sure that it remains within the limits that are acceptable from the health.
Obviously, not everybody shares Dan Jason's ideals about agricultural methods. But if we believe there are some problems with non-organic agriculture, what can we do?
If we chose to, and we really understood how serious the crisis was, we could make a full transition of all farming to organic within 10 years. We need to do that. We need to put the tax on pesticides and fertilizers and then bring the income to support the transition. We need to, for instance, change all the agricultural extension agencies that are telling the farmers when to put the pesticide, when to put the fertilizers, and start, instead giving them full educational support around the organic transition. We need to tax all the, the non-organic food even, so that there's income going in to subsidize the organic food so that the price is down. It's great news that a wretched company like Walmart is now supporting organic food to redeem themselves. And part of the reason is that the CEO of Walmart has just had grandchildren. And he's looking at his grandchildren and thinking, what kind of a legacy am I leaving my grandchildren? And then he's got consultancy from a group called the Rocky Mountain Institute, who are very smart in their thinking, saying, look, you can benefit yourselves as a company and the planet by making the full shift to earth-friendly products, organic food, organic cotton, sustainable energy and stuff like that.
Look for ways that you can grow some of your food. Look for ways that you can even just grow some herbs that you can harvest. Be sure that you know where those seeds are coming from. And when you go to support other growers of food and buy your produce, your food, any of your food, look for locally grown. Labeling is becoming a huge issue, and everything that is well labeled is giving you that information. If you care and there's no label, you can just ask, where did it come from?
In Europe, there were people who simply went to the grocery counters and said to the clerks, just as they were about to check out their groceries, could you tell me which products contain the genetically modified ingredients? And the clerk said, well, I'll have to call the manager. Managers would come and say, well, we don't know. Well, then I guess I can't buy anything. And the other people in the line waiting and waiting and waiting would say, what's the delay? What's the problem? And then they would explain to them what was going on. Pretty soon everybody's saying, well, what do you mean genetic modification? Very simple act by one citizen can spread that word. Pretty soon managers don't want to have it in the food. They don't want it in their products because it upsets the consumers.
We need to ban all junk food advertising on children's television. Period, entirely. Like we don't allow cigarette advertising anymore. No junk food advertising for sugar, sweets, all that stuff should be totally taken off television. We need to tax all junk food that's sold and put all of the money into advertising for organic food and to supporting organic farmers. We need to tax pesticides and fertilizers and put the income into helping farmers make the transition to organic food. We need to get really strong. There's an absolute health emergency brewing here. The cost of treating cancer is becoming enormous. The cost of the new drugs is enormous. And that's in the developing world, where the growth is even stronger with cancer now, and they've got no healthcare systems. People don't even go to the health clinic until they're almost at the terminal stage. They can't treat their cancers. They haven't got the cost for the drugs. They have to go for prevention. We have to stop the food corporations of the developed world going into the developing world and sort of selling their genetically modified seeds and their chemicals and fertilizers and poisoning third world countries as well. It's absolutely, criminal what we're allowing to happen.
For me personally, it'll take about an acre to grow the food that I consume through a year. So if I make the choice to switch to organic, then I'm removing all the pesticides and all the chemical fertilizers from 1 acre of land. That's the effect of my choice. When I vote by my purchasing decision to buy organic, that's the effect of it. The effect is I take all the poisons off of 1 acre of land. And you can see that if you have a city of 1 million people and they were all to do that, that's 1 million acres. So, our choices can be very, very powerful. And so, and at the same, you know, so there's two sides to that. By making a choice to go organic, you're cleaning up your own environment, you know, your personal environment. You're not adding a pesticide load to your own body through what you eat. So you get a personal effect right away. And then the other effect is that you're having an effect on the global environment of farming.
I felt that I had to ask a Salt Spring Island artist at least once about organic food. Palu took half an hour to write me a song about his point of view. Then he sang.
There's a time when we must all eat for health to benefit all. The types of seeds we plant make our food. Our gardens make us cool. Happy are we in our organic way to live a wholesome life. Happy are we in our organic way to live a wholesome life.
I think what Dan Jason has done has been extraordinary. What he has done is awakened a whole new generation and a lot of the older generation of people to the fact that we're losing our seed diversity. We're losing the lifeblood of the planet, and he's awoken people to the fact that corporations have been patenting seeds, that corporations have been buying up seed companies. And he's been one of the leaders in the movement to reintroduce cultivars, old varieties, heritage seeds back into our culture. What I think is essential that he and the hundreds of other people across the world that are doing this work wake up enough people and wake up governments to the fact that this has to be done on a large scale. The lack of support for global seed banks, the loss of seed banks in the former Soviet Union and elsewhere is jeopardizing future generations at the expense of us having cheap food for a very short period of time. I think that Dan is creating a wake-up call. It is not enough that we have an underground economy and seed exchange. It's not enough that a lot of people are beginning to save their own seeds and that they're exchanging seeds. This has to become the mainstream. And I think what Dan and other people like him have done is to start to educate people so they become aware, so that they can make the demands on governments and on international organizations to start to reintroduce all of these varieties.
Okay, guys, that was a great visit. Thanks a lot for coming, and do come back.
Yes, I have to come back and eat more of your food. It was fun to visit your garden. I learned a lot, and it was extremely enjoyable. We know you have other visitors too.
Yeah, it's amazing how many people find me here and how many times I take people through the garden in the midst of trying to send them the seeds to make their own gardens.
It was a great educational moment with you. Thanks a lot.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.